More than 600 million people use Spotify monthly. It's the world's largest music streaming service, more than double the size of any of its competitors. You would think, with numbers like that, Spotify would be a money-printing machine. But behind the music, playlists, and podcasts, there's a problem. A $117 billion company that still can't reliably turn a profit. This is the story of Spotify's dramatic rise and its broken business model. It's the early 2000s. The music industry is in free fall. Piracy reigns. Platforms like Napster have helped slash global music revenues from about $28 billion in 1999 to just $13 billion in 2014. Songs are being shared illegally by the millions. Record labels are desperate, and artists are watching their incomes collapse. Enter Spotify. In Stockholm, a 23-year-old entrepreneur named Daniel Ek has a bold idea. He grew up on pirated music, but he believes he can convert people who listen to pirated music into paying customers, or at least get them to listen to ads. His plan? Create a music platform that's fast, convenient, and offers free access to all the music people want. He plans to monetize the audience by having ads and a subscription plan for people who want to avoid ads. Ek wanted to avoid Napster's fatal mistake, so he got record labels on board from day one. In 2008, Spotify launched in Europe. It was a huge success. In 2011, Spotify finally convinced the big labels to let them launch in the United States, which is the world's largest music market. By making peace with the record labels and luring users away from piracy, Spotify positioned itself as the savior of the music industry. By 2022, global music revenues had reached $26 billion, primarily driven by streaming. Spotify won the battle against piracy by giving people what they wanted. Now it had to figure out how to become profitable. By 2023, Spotify's user base had exploded to over 600 million monthly active users. About 236 million of those users were paying subscribers. This made Spotify the undisputed leader in music streaming, with a roughly 32% market share globally. This was more than twice the share of Apple Music, which was at 14%. Users loved Spotify. It became a verb, "I'll Spotify that song." The platform's personalized playlists, such as Discover Weekly and its massive catalog, kept people hooked. All the songs you love, anytime, anywhere for free. That was Spotify's pitch, and it worked. Spotify's monthly active users continued to climb quarter after quarter. The company expanded into 180-plus countries, bringing millions of new listeners from Latin America, Europe, Asia, and beyond. The free tier was a funnel. It got people in the door with free tunes, then converted some of them into paid subscribers for higher quality audio and ad-free content.
This strategy helped Spotify attract a large number of users, but it came at a steep cost. By training a generation of listeners to expect music for free or for a low monthly fee, Spotify set the stage for an enormous dilemma. The more users and streams it had, the more royalties it had to pay out. And those royalties were, and are, massive. The company was about to learn while free music was great for attracting users, it was a dangerous game for the bottom line. Here's the dirty secret of music streaming. When you pay for Spotify, most of that money goes straight to the music industry. Spotify's deal with record labels and music rights holders are structured so that roughly 70 cents of every $1 in revenue goes out as royalty payments. That money is split among record labels, artists, and basically everyone who owns a piece of the music. What's left for Spotify is 30% of revenue to cover everything else, like servers, employees, and marketing. The more its revenue grew, the more royalties it had to pay. In 2023 alone, Spotify paid out over $9 billion in royalties to artists and rights holders. To put that in perspective, the company's total revenue that year was around $14 billion. Due to Spotify's low margins, it has been challenging for them to turn a profit. The record labels hold all the cards when it comes to music rights. If Spotify attempts to negotiate lower royalty rates, the labels can push back hard. What are Spotify's alternatives? Not having music from Universal Music Group's artists, or those of Sony or Warner, would be a death blow to the platform. Spotify cannot remove or replace the content from the big labels. It's the lifeblood of their business. Spotify's founders likely hoped that economies of scale would eventually tip the balance, that once they had hundreds of millions of users, things would get easier financially. But the opposite happened. Their royalty obligations scaled with their user base. This prompted Spotify to seek a way out. Since music is a low-margin product, they decided to diversify into different audio content such as podcasts and audiobooks. Spotify went on a spending spree. The company invested heavily in acquiring podcast studios and technology. They spent over $1 billion snapping up podcast companies such as Gimlet Media, Parcast, and Anchor. They also inked exclusive deals with big-name creators. The most famous deal was for Joe Rogan's wildly popular podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience. It is reported that they signed him for $100 million. The idea was simple. If Spotify became the #1 platform for podcasts and audiobooks, it could sell advertising and subscriptions around that content without paying 70% to record labels for each listen. Spotify was searching desperately for paths to profitability that didn't involve just raising music subscription prices. For a while, it seemed Spotify was on track to reinvent itself. CEO Daniel Ek declared Spotify was no longer just a music company, but an audio company. He envisioned a future where Spotify would be like Netflix, investing in original content like podcast shows, audiobooks, and maybe one day music production. But spending a fortune is one thing. Getting a return on that investment is another. By 2022, questions arose. Was the podcast bet paying off? Spotify's big bet on podcasts and other content led to considerable growth. In 2020 and 2021, podcast listening on Spotify surged. The company proudly noted it had become the top podcast platform in many markets. However, the financial payoff was unclear. By late 2022, news broke that Spotify's podcast division was losing a ton of money. Despite spending $1 billion on podcast deals and studios, Spotify hadn't seen the profit boom it hoped for. Even the push into audiobooks was more of a long-term play than an immediate revenue driver. Audible, which is owned by Amazon, still dominated that market. In truth, most of Spotify's users still come from music, and music was still where the vast bulk of listening hours were spent. All the expensive exclusives and new content did not change the fact that Spotify's fate was tied to the music it did not own. Investors and executives were getting impatient. They doubted the grow now, profit later story. So, where does that leave Spotify? It leaves it in a perpetual margin squeeze. This is why the foundation of Spotify's business is broken. It created a fantastic product that users love, but the economics are inherently stacked against it. The company doesn't manufacture the thing it sells, and its suppliers have oligopoly power. No matter how efficient or lean Spotify becomes, it can't change the fact that every time you press play, a big chunk of its revenue goes to someone else. To make matters worse, Spotify's competitors have a huge advantage. Their music streaming platforms do not have to be profitable. They have deep pockets and other revenue streams. Apple doesn't mind if Apple Music isn't highly profitable. It exists to enhance the iPhone's value and retain users within the Apple ecosystem. Amazon uses music to sweeten its Prime membership. Spotify does not. Streaming is Spotify's business. So what now? Can Spotify survive in the long run, or is it running out of time? On the optimistic side, Spotify's recent moves have shown glimmers of hope. By late 2024, Spotify finally achieved what it had been promising for years, its first ever full year of operating profit. This was a landmark moment, achieved through cost-cutting measures and price hikes. If Spotify can maintain financial discipline, it might prove it's capable of being sustainably profitable. It may never achieve the kind of fat profits that tech investors dreamed of,